The overwhelming scholarly consensus among historians, regardless of religious belief, holds that a Jewish preacher named Yeshua existed in first-century Judea. This minimal historical Jesus is distinct from the theological Christ of faith. Historians rely on specific methodologies, not faith, to establish this baseline fact. The debate is not whether Jesus performed miracles, but whether a historical person served as the catalyst for the movement. Mythicism, conversely, asserts that the figure of Jesus originated purely as a celestial or mythological being, later historicized by early Christian communities. This position is rejected by nearly all experts in classical antiquity and New Testament studies, who view the evidence for a historical founder as robust, even if sparse. The core disagreement centers on interpreting the earliest available textual data. One powerful tool used to isolate historical data is the Criterion of Embarrassment. This principle suggests that details embarrassing or counterproductive to the early church's mission are likely authentic, as they would not have been invented. Examples include Jesus' baptism by John, which implies John's superiority, or Jesus' execution by crucifixion, a shameful death reserved for criminals. Furthermore, the disciples' flight and denial after the arrest, and the initial discovery of the empty tomb by women, who were considered unreliable witnesses in that culture, strongly suggest historical roots rather than later pious fabrications designed to enhance the narrative. These elements provide anchors for a historical figure. Non-Christian sources, while late, confirm the existence of the early Christian movement and its founder. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing around 115 CE, mentions Christus as the founder of the Christians, who was executed under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian writing in the late 1st century, includes 2 passages referencing Jesus. While the longer passage, the Testimonium Flavianum, contains clear Christian interpolations, most scholars agree that a core reference to Jesus as a wise man and the brother of James remains authentic. These external references confirm that the movement traced its origin to a specific individual executed in Judea, reinforcing the historical hypothesis. The earliest undisputed Christian writings are the letters of Paul, composed between 50 and 60 CE, decades before the Gospels. Paul refers to Jesus as born of a woman and having brothers, specifically naming James the brother of the Lord. Paul also mentions that Jesus instituted the Last Supper and was crucified. Mythicists often argue that Paul's references to Jesus are purely spiritual, referring only to a celestial being. However, Paul's specific references to James and Peter, whom he met, and his knowledge of the crucifixion location outside Jerusalem, strongly indicate he understood Jesus as a recent historical figure who lived on earth. Paul's theology is built upon a historical event, not just a cosmic myth. The Gospels, written between 70 and 100 CE, are not modern biographies but theological narratives intended to proclaim the significance of Jesus. They utilize literary conventions and theological interpretations common in Hellenistic literature. The differences between the Synoptic Gospels and John demonstrate significant editorial shaping and theological development over time. Historians must filter these sources, separating the probable historical kernels from the layers of miracle stories and post-resurrection theological claims. The quest for the historical Jesus involves identifying the earliest traditions, often found in the hypothetical Q source or mark, before later embellishments obscured the original figure.
Christ mythicism is the hypothesis that Jesus of Nazareth never existed as a historical person. Proponents argue that the figure evolved from Jewish messianic expectations combined with Hellenistic mystery cults, where a dying and rising Savior God was common. Mythicists often point to the lack of contemporary pagan or Jewish records mentioning Jesus during his supposed lifetime. They contend that early Christian references to Jesus' life, death, and resurrection were originally allegorical or celestial, only later misinterpreted as earthly events by subsequent generations of believers. This position fundamentally challenges the methodology used by mainstream historical scholarship. The argument from silence, claiming that the lack of contemporary records proves non-existence, is generally considered weak in historical methodology, especially for non-elite figures in the 1st century. Most people, including religious founders, left no direct contemporary written record. The earliest Christian sources, Paul's letters, were written within 20 years of Jesus' traditional death date, which is remarkably early for an ancient figure. Furthermore, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE likely eliminated many potential records. Historians prioritize the earliest positive attestations, like Paul and the core traditions in Mark, over the absence of external documentation. Mythicists frequently cite parallels between Jesus and figures like Mithras, Osiris, or Horus, claiming that Christianity borrowed the dying and rising God motif. While parallels exist in ancient religious thought, the specific details often cited are exaggerated or anachronistic, relying on later interpretations of those myths. For instance, the idea of a virgin birth or resurrection in many pagan myths often postdates the development of Christianity. The historical context of Jesus is distinctly Jewish, rooted in apocalyptic expectations and prophetic tradition, which differentiates it significantly from the Hellenistic mystery cults often invoked by mythicists. The Christ myth theory gained prominence during the Enlightenment and the 19th century, driven by rationalist critiques of religion. Key early proponents included Bruno Bauer and later figures like Arthur Drews. Modern mythicism is often associated with internet activism, but it lacks institutional support within academic history departments. The consensus view is that while the theological Christ is heavily mythological, the historical figure who inspired the movement is recoverable through critical historical methods. The distinction between the historical Jesus and the mythological Christ is crucial for understanding why historians reject the total non-existence claim. The historical evidence, including multiple independent attestations, the Criterion of Embarrassment, and the early dating of Pauline references to a historical brother and crucifixion, establishes a strong case for a historical Jesus. Mythicism fails to account for the rapid emergence of a movement centered on a specific executed individual in Judea, preferring complex theories of celestial beings historicized within decades. While the historical Jesus remains a minimalist figure, stripped of miracles and divine attributes, his existence is treated as a foundational fact by nearly all scholars specializing in the period, contrasting sharply with the fringe status of the Christ myth theory.